children of Diti and Aditi. Children of Diti are those, Diti and Aditi were sisters. Diti means finite. Children of Diti are those people who believe they are nothing but their bodies. And they are called Daityas. Children of Diti are Daityas. And Aditi means infinite. And infinite here is a pointing to consciousness, to Chaitana, to Shiva within us, right? Maheshwara within us, which is infinite because it transcends space and time. So there will be conflict between Adityas and the Daityas, between those who worship the Vedas or the Devas and those who worship raw power, which is the Daityas. And that will always happen. I wrote that little essay called Hinduism for the Perplexed because in my view, there is a tremendous misunderstanding about what the Hindu tradition is. And this misunderstanding arose primarily because Western scholars in the 19th century and thereafter, when they examined Hinduism, through their interactions and through the study of the various texts, because there was a great effort to make a sense of what the huge amount of Sanskrit and other language texts that they had gathered from India, what could they explain about the nature of Indian society? And I think that's where they made a huge mistake, because their knowledge, while very valuable from the perspective of gathering information and collating it and placing it in different categories, was sort of bookish knowledge. There is a difference between bookish knowledge and knowledge related to the deeper understanding. In the words of Chomsky, you could speak about surface knowledge and deep knowledge. Surface meaning of a text and a deeper meaning of the text. So they got the surface meaning all right, but they, in my view, not everybody, but a vast majority of them, especially those who do academic kind of work, miss the deeper meaning. And that incorrect meaning has been sadly perpetuated in India ever since 1947. It appears to me that there was a conscious decision that we will follow such and such framework to understand India for self-knowledge. And that's where Hinduism was categorized in terms of anthropology, in terms of interaction between various groups, and not in terms of the deeper meaning which bound different people together. And I think this now, for a variety of reasons, especially at this moment, as India is sort of zooming ahead of other nations in terms of economic development. And to place that in framework, remember that until about 1000 or 1100, India's share of the world economy was about 45%. And by the time the English came, it was still about 20 to 25% in 1800. By 1918, it had shrunk to 1.4%. The 19th century was a century of horrors, not necessarily people being slaughtered, their necks being cut, but the taxation and other policies that the English put in place, and also ensuring that while the Industrial Revolution was taking place in Europe, there was no corresponding investment in factories and production in India. So India really became impoverished, not only did Indian share of the world economy collapse to 1.8% from 20 to 25%. They also stole, according to current estimates, about $45 trillion worth of wealth, and their policies caused maybe 80 million Indians to die through famines that were created. And so then in 1947, when we were looking backwards, we tended to see India through the lens of the 19th century. We thought that's what it was. And what the English scholars had told about India was really the truth. And It's incorrect because I studied the text, and not just me. You take the words of, say, Aurobindo, you take the words of a very well-known scholar, the Sri Lankan English scholar, Ananda Kumaraswamy, who talked about it very directly, and he railed, he says, look, the Western scholars are getting it totally wrong. But after 1947, people like Ananda Kumaraswamy and many, many others were sort of set aside, and we were presented a view related to social organization and social contests, because you can write a story in so many different ways. And that's being challenged now. So I thought it'll be a good thing to talk about what the heart of Hinduism is in terms of 18, if I'm not mistaken, 18 main ideas. And I believe they do capture what Hinduism is, and they're totally consistent with India's own self-understanding, which you see, for example, if you go to the Upanishads, or you go to the Bhagavad Gita, or you look at what the various passages in books like the Mahabharata, etc., communicate, as well as the gloss over all of these books by Indian scholars themselves, and not just Ananda Kumaraswamy or Aurobindo, but people like Gopinath Kaviraj and many, many others, widely respected. So this is what I thought would be a good thing to cut through all the noise, if you will, and go to the very heart of what Hinduism is. First of all, Hinduism sees reality as being, which in Sanskrit is called Brahman. It's one consistent whole. And this reality, if one were to put it in modern terms, because one way to understand something is to compare and contrast it with other things. So you have two universal views of reality. One is modern mainstream science. Modern mainstream science normally sees reality as consisting of objects and relationships between those objects. So basically as things and evolution of these things. And we are also things. We are also objects. We are biological objects. So this is modern view. Now, Hinduism sees reality as objects and things and their evolution, but also as consciousness. So there are two sides to reality as conceived by Hinduism, things and consciousness, and they are complementary aspects of reality. And in fact, it's interesting to note that this is consistent also with the most advanced science, which is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is at the basis of all the physical and biological sciences. Without quantum mechanics, you cannot understand chemistry or biology or brain science or semiconductors or integrated circuits and so on. And according to quantum mechanics, which in itself, according to its own creator, co-creator, Erwin Schrödinger, who was an Austrian Vedantin, in his own autobiography, he claims that the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahma, which means that this Atman, which is our self, in some mysterious way mirrors the entire cosmos, which is the Brahman. In the same way, the most subtle physical object, a quantum state, is a superposition of all possibilities, you know, this Atman, Brahman equivalence, if you will. And this is the central idea. And the other central idea of quantum mechanics is that when you interact with it, you are able to access only one of all the different possibilities that exist. And so physics itself is consistent. So the greatest physicists accept Vedanta, and Vedanta is the heart of analytical Hinduism, if you will. But in the mainstream, in policy-making departments, in the hallways of the academia, in the social sciences, they don't understand quantum mechanics. They still see things in terms of individuals and as objects who are interacting with each other. So maybe we could call it 19th century physics. So, okay, so the first thing is that reality has two aspects, consciousness and embodiments, which in the words of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is that we have sharir, bodies, right? We are also sharir, but we also have Atma. Atma is consciousness, and it's the same Atma which is mirrored within each individual. So this is the very heart. Now, this complementarity between objects and consciousness is what is eternal. You know, you have mantras such as Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Mrityor means from the world of Mrityu, which is the world of objects, because objects must be born and die. And we are also that self. We are also a biological self. From that self, take us to the very heart of our being, which is consciousness. So that is Amritam. Or Asato Ma Sadgamaya. Asat is what is transforming all the time, and Sat is which is eternal, because consciousness exists beyond space and time. It transcends space and time. Now, in one of the Upanishads, Mundak Upanishad, it's stated that there are two kinds of knowledge, apara and para. Apara is the kind of knowledge which can be spoken about, which can be bound in language. So all the normal sciences that we study in the schools or in colleges, because study can only be in terms of what the teacher tells you, right? So it's bound in words. So it's linguistic knowledge or language tied knowledge. So that's all called apara, which is lower. But the knowledge of the experiencing self, namely knowledge of consciousness, is para. And para cannot be described because para is beyond words. What is bound in words can only be what is properties of objects or properties of abstractions or abstract categories that you can think of. So that can be bound in words. So knowledge has two kinds, apara and para. And in schools and colleges, they can only teach you apara. For para, you must go to the Vedas or the Upanishads. Now, not in the words themselves, but meditating on what you have in these books can help you transform, so to speak, and go to the very heart of your being. Now, one of the statements that is made in one of the traditions is Shivoham. Shivaha aham, I am Shiva. And Shiva is that consciousness within us, within each being. Pratyek prani mein wahi jo consciousness hai, chetana hai, that's called Shiva. And the Bhagavad Gita also says, within each prani I am Maheshwara, ki main Ishwar hoon. So the idea of consciousness complementing physical reality is unique, and that's what sets Hinduism apart from other traditions, because almost all other traditions speak about individuals, of course, but primarily they speak about the soul. For example, in Christianity or in Islam, you speak about the Ruhu. Now, Ruhu is not quite the Atman, although the word Ruhu itself is derived from a Sanskrit word. And how do I know it? Because in the Vedas, you have the idea of Urvara as the physical manifestation, and Indra, Urvara and Urvan, Indra who relates to the energizing being within the world is called Urvan. Now, we know from Avesta, now sadly, very few Indians have studied Avesta, which they should, because Avesta came after the Vedas, and Avesta is the precursor to Persian literature, and Persian literature influenced also the Arabs, because Persia was east of Arabs. So the word Urvan as the heart of the individual within the bodies became Ruvan, and Ravani in Persian which is flow, is also from Ruvan. From Ruvan came the word Ruhu. But it's not quite Atma. Why? Because Ruhu was seen as a separate individual within each being, within each body, within each living individual. And that's why, because it was still primarily body-centric, the idea of life in paradise or Jannat now, in the same body, became central to the conception of that religion. And in the Abrahamic tradition, largely, while in the Hindu tradition, in Hinduism, you see each one of us as mirroring the entire cosmos, yat pinde tad brahmande, as in the pinda, which is the self, so in the entire cosmos. So it's the same Atman. This is counterintuitive. We are the same self, although our minds are different. You know, fundamental to this distinction is that all of us are different minds, where our self-understanding is determined by our personal journey and our memories, right? All our memories are different, but the self is the same. Now, you might say, how do we understand that? Shiva is also in Sanskrit text called Prakasha. It's the light which falls on our brain. It's like, you know, maybe another way of looking at it is, a radio does not create the sounds that you hear. The sounds come from somewhere else, and they are embodied by the circuitry of the radio or the circuitry of the television. So likewise, we are illuminated or illumined by Shiva, which is the light which is within us. And this light is transcending. And so this is a beautiful and very subtle idea, which is able to literally explain everything. The moment you say, Aham Brahmasmi, which means that within me is the entire cosmos, or I am Atma, or I am Atma Brahma, or if you say Pragyanam Brahman, this is another of the Upanishadic Mahavakya, or if you say Chaitanyam Atma, as in the Shiva Sutras, that this Chaitanya, that this awareness of consciousness itself is Atman. It's nothing, something hidden, because that is the general naive idea that maybe my Atma is something hidden within me. I don't know what it is. No, what the Vedas say is this Chaitanya itself is the Atman. And if you can only turn your perspective around, and rather than identify yourself with the contents of your mind, right, which are of course going to be different, and where your emotions play a big role. Your emotions say, hey, somebody has hurt you, so I must hurt that person, or this or that. Another tradition, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But that's the conversation, the discourse of the mind. The consciousness is the sakshi, is the drashta, right? So there, everything is the same. And that's where knowledge resides. And that is the very heart of Hinduism. Now, it's also seen in other ways. For example, you say, it's one. But then this one becomes two, first of all, if you look at it from the perspective of object and subject, right? There are so many objects and there is me. So it becomes two. It also becomes three, because the Vedas are also called Traividya. And who are these three? These are Sat, which is all reality, Chit, which is consciousness, and Ananda, which is the experience of this reality by ourselves. So Sat, Chit, and Ananda, or Sat Chidananda, right? Or you can, if you were to see them in the Sagun form, Sat would be Vishnu, because Vishnu pervades the entire cosmos. The word Vish itself means pervader. Chit is consciousness, that is Shiva and Vishnu. And Ananda is the body within which we live, which is Prakriti, not just our personal body, but the body of this earth, the terrestrial earth, and the entire physical cosmos, which is Prakriti, which is the goddess. So Satchitananda then becomes Vishnu, Shiva, and the goddess. So these are the three basic aspects. Now, you can say that I want to reach Shiva. I want to reach the very heart of consciousness. And consciousness is the axis, the aksha, around which all our memories move. You know, our self, each of us, our self is like a cyclone, because our memories are going round and round all the time, like a vritta, as in Yoga Sutras. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, right? It's the stopping of the vrittis in the chitta, in the inner sky of consciousness, right? Of awareness. So our memories are going back and forth, and we even forget what our memories are. We've forgotten most of what happened, transpired in our childhood, or even what happened yesterday, or sometimes we forget what we ate yesterday, or did we do this, or did we do that? So things are forgotten, but we still remember we are the same. Our cells change. Our physical body gets transformed in our life. All the cells sort of recycle through. As we eat, as we nourish, cells die and cells are reborn. So what is it that holds everything together? So we are like a cyclone in our consciousness. The axis doesn't move. You know, amazing thing in a cyclone is the further you are from the axis, the greater the speed. The axis, the eye of the storm is unstopping. There's no movement in the eye of the storm. So Shiva is that eye of that storm within us. Shiva, there is no movement at all. And Shiva is that axis. And Shiva is the axis which holds this universe together. And in fact, in Atharva Veda, there is a hymn which speaks about the skambha, or the pillar around which all the universe exists. And that pillar is Shiva, that skambha. In fact, the iconic form of Shiva that is normally worshipped is a representation of that axis. Okay, so Shiva is that axis which doesn't move. Vishnu is the moral law which holds this universe together, and the goddess, of course, is us, both in our beings. Now, of course, we must also emphasize that no matter who, whether it's a male or a female, the heart is Shiva. There's no difference. Whether it's a male, Shivoham, female, Shivoham. But our body is Prakriti, is the goddess. And to reach this axis, how do we reach the center of a cyclone, center of a hurricane? If we perceive our lives as a hurricane, you must travel closer and closer to the axis. We must travel through the body. So the only way to make sense of it is through Prakriti, through the goddess, through the very architecture of our minds. So when we go in, and going in is what is Tantra. When we go in, it's the grace of the goddess which takes us to the very heart of our being. And now, three main goddesses are conceived. You can call them Durga, Lakshmi, and Saraswati, you know, based on whether we are talking about the very nature of ourself, the resolve, or what makes this journey auspicious, which is Lakshmi, or what makes it possible for us to understand, that is Saraswati. You know, the closer and closer you come to the deity, whether it's Vishnu or Shiva, you have to do it through the agency of the goddess. So even somebody such as Adi Shankaracharya, who spoke about, you know, that you are nothing, Shivoham, for example, Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham, Shivoham, right? His beautiful stotra. Worship the goddess, because the only way to make sense of all this is through the grace of the goddess. And that's why even Shankaracharya wrote his great Saundarya Lahari, you know, the wave of beauty which made him go with his own being to the source, that is Shiva. So really, this dichotomy of male and female, it all dissolves, because ultimately at that point, in fact, there's a passage in the Shaiva tradition, and Shaiva tradition is absolutely identical to what the Vedas say. In the Vedas, as I said, I am Atma Brahman, you say that. My Atman is Brahman. In Shiva Sutra, you say Chaitanyam Atma. Now, of course, the Vedic system is based on Sankhya, which speaks of 25 tattvas. One is Purush, and the other 24 are Prakriti in different manifestations. The 5 Mahabhutas, the 5 Tanmatras, the 5 Karmendriyas, the 5 Gyanendriyas, and then Buddhi, Ahankar, and Manas. That makes it 23. 24 is Prakriti, and 25th is Purush. But the Vedas also speak about 11 Rudras, and Rudras are different manifestations of Shiva. Rudra is one form of Shiva. Now you might say, hey, what does that really mean? Because when you go to college or university, your academic book, which, as I've already said, are all wrong, they just don't get it. They would say, well, Rudra was the early Vedic god, and later on another god came along, as if these gods are walking on some podium, and that god was Shiva, and that Shiva took the forms of Rudra. All wrong, nonsense. Consciousness is light. Light has two aspects: heat, right? And then transparency, pure light. Heat is Rudra. Rudra is that Prachanda form of Shiva, heat form of Shiva, which makes you cry, or fearful form of Shiva, right? Because that is the heat. You have to go through the heat before you'll see the light, right? In a light lamp, in a bulb also, you have heat as well as light, right? And Rudra represents that tapas, that heat you have to go through before the light will shine through you. That tapasya, for example, that heat, right? Or Rudra in another poetic form, you have Samudra Manthan. And as the Manthan is the Manthan which goes within you, within each individual, at the cosmic level, but within each individual, you have the sense that you are nothing but the body, and the sense that you are awareness. That Manthan is what creates all the siddhis, all the vibhutis, all the gifts that anybody can achieve. Any human being can become genius. That's what the Vedas say. But you must do that Manthan. And through that Manthan appear vibhutis, first, but also appear suffering, that poison that Shiva swallows, and which can destroy the entire world, which is in his throat, right? Which is why he's called Nilakanta. So what is this poison? It's this poison, this awareness that one will die. If you're too afraid of dying, then you will not even be able to proceed, right? So you have to swallow that. You have to put that aside. And then if you can put that aside, then all kinds of beautiful things happen. You get gifts, you get success, you get understanding of whatever kind, you can do whatever things you can do. And that is the fructification of yoga, because the path of Shiva is also the path of yoga, right? Shiva is the Mahayogi, the Adi Yogi, and so on. So, so the whole story, Aparnaji, let me tell you, it's also beautiful. It all hangs together. It hangs together. It's totally consistent with all of science. The Vedas also say that all the bodies evolve according to Rita. And Rita means laws. Rita, that's why you have Ritu, seasons. They follow each other in sequence, right? According to law, Ritas. Everything in the manifested world is according to science, according to physical laws. So everything is extraordinary, and you can also understand the world of the inner cosmos, which is, of course, that we all live with, which no other tradition addresses. No other tradition, no other cultural or religious tradition addresses that in a comprehensive way. Of course, there are wonderful people or seekers in all cultures and civilizations have arrived at the same understanding intuitively, but it's only one place, and we are happy to be the inheritors, to be the lucky inheritors of this great tradition where this was formulated in a fashion which is so extraordinary. Because I can tell you, as somebody who also does science, and who's worked in cosmology and quantum mechanics and information theory, and also does the Vedas, it is totally consistent, which is beautiful because we now stand at a point in history which is a very dangerous time for all of humanity, because AI machines are going to replace human beings. People will lose jobs all over the world. The population of the world will shrink, as it has already started to in many parts of the world. So the whole economic regime will be very different. There will be depression and unhappiness, as is already happening, let's say, in the West. Just last year, more than 100,000 people died of drug overdose. And these are young people with children and, you know, beautiful looking people, but they are so depressed because if the whole world keeps on telling them, Hollywood keeps on telling them that you're nothing but your bodies and you can have fun and this and that, but after some time, it all starts to pale. And it's the same thing in that big mimic machine called Bollywood, which copies everything that is produced in Hollywood. It's also pushing this on Indians, you know, totally fake story. So that's not going to bring happiness to people. People are going to be unhappy, depressed. Many of them would want to kill themselves, as is already happening. Or they would wonder, hey, who am I? What's my gender mean? I'm not this gender or that gender. I want to change my gender. That is the biggest thing going on in America right now. Everybody wants to change their gender. Women want to become men. Men want to become women, or they want to be both at the same time. You know, that's interesting working of Maya. But ultimately, you can make sense of all of this only if you understand yourself. And to understand yourself, it's not enough just to understand the outer world, which college science, it provides you a good sense of what is the outer world. You can do social sciences, you can do economics, you can do psychology, this and that. You get some sense of the outer world, but unless it's matched and complemented by a sense of the inner world, there is a mismatch. And if there's mismatch, there is suffering. There's suffering, there's grief. And if there's grief, there is depression. Now, I must also tell you that the outer sciences themselves are failing because outer sciences cannot explain cosmology. Physics as we know it, physics and astronomy as we know it, can explain only 0.5% of the outer cosmos, which is why now physics is postulating 96% of dark matter and dark energy, for which there is not the slightest evidence. 68% dark energy, 28% dark matter, plus 3.5% is interstellar dust, 99.5%. So physics can only explain 0.5% of the cosmos. And it appears to me that the Vedic tradition, and I've done some work on it recently in the last 2-3 years. I've published a whole series of papers which can perhaps explain it by bringing in a different perspective on how to look at reality. We can explain this missing dark matter and dark energy. So to come back, Hinduism is not only an exposition of the inner world as we normally see it. Okay, to aapki aastha hai. It also gives you the tools and instruments to look at the outer reality, because you had the darshanas, not just Vedanta or Nyaya or Sankhya or the two Mimansas, the Purva and the Uttar Mimamsa, but it also is lived Hinduism is yoga. You know, the 5 darshanas, 5 of the 6 darshanas are about analysis, you know, analysis and contemplation. But how do we live life as a Hindu? You know, Hinduism for the perplexed is through yoga. Yoga is Hinduism. Hinduism is equal to yoga, one of the 6 darshanas. And as we already know, even though after 1947, independent India turned its back on Hindu wisdom. They said, no, we are only going to be guided by what Western Indologists tell us what Hinduism is all about, which is all wrong, of course. But poor Indian yogis went and left India, went to different corners of the world, and some of them were not even formally educated, and spread the message of yoga so that now, right now, I can say that a vast majority of people in all different corners of the world and a significant number of people, even in countries such as Arabia, because I've spoken to one of these yogacharyas from Saudi Arabia, who's quite a very popular person in Arabia, they would admit that our path is the path of yoga. So Hinduism, if it's equal to yoga, is already transforming the entire world. And now if you're stuck in this dichotomy of Hinduism versus non-Hinduism in India, you know, there's this big fight going on. What is a Hindu? And the state must run Hindu temples because we can't trust the Hindus to run their temples and so on. And Hinduism is about caste, etc., which is all false and wrong, because according to Hinduism, or according to the Vedas, every human being has the same Purush within. And it's through the Purush, which is consciousness, that these different categories related to transference or energy or accumulation and service arise. So within each human being are all the 4 varnas. And conflation of jati and varna, which Indologists did, who did not understand it, has created all this confusion, which of course modern academics have sort of embraced. But all this nonsense will of course fall away. So all I can say is that Hinduism as we know it right now, I travel all across America and in different countries, and I talk to ordinary people, sometimes even in churches, I get invited, and they all say, we are all yogis. So they say, we are all, if you translate that into Sanskritic language, they say that we are all a part of Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan is the thing right now, because truth can only be Sanatan. Truth can only be eternal. What is created by humans, no matter which human, will fall away. So what Hinduism is as Sanatan Dharma, it's about eternal verities, eternal truth. And one of the leading novelists, English novelists of the 20th century, in fact, there was a poll in 1999 or 2000, what is the greatest English novel of the 20th century? And they came up with The Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley himself embraced Sanatan Dharma, but in order to make it easy for Westerners to accept what this word was, he translated that into the perennial philosophy. He says, Sanatan Dharma is the perennial philosophy. So one could, for those who don't know, hey, what does dharma mean? This is what it is, the eternal truth. That is what it is. And that's what, in my essay, Hinduism for the Perplexed, which all of you viewers can just Google it and it'll come up as an essay on Medium. But I also wrote a longer version of it for academia.edu, where it's called A Brief History of Hinduism, or a brief primer on Hinduism. So you'll see that it's a bit longer, maybe twice or thrice as long. And again, to repeat, Sanatan Dharma is knowledge both of the inner cosmos and the outer cosmos. It provides many different techniques. It's also technology of life, which is what yoga is. You know, you can talk endlessly, which is what the various 5 darshanas do. But finally, how do we live life? That's yoga. And one aspect of yoga is tantra, because you can do yoga as the Bhagavad Gita, which is the greatest primer on yoga, is the Bhagavad Gita. It speaks about various yogas, you know, karma yoga, bhakti yoga. and so on, Jnana Yoga. So there are various kinds of yoga, and that's what the heart of Hinduism is. Tell me one person across the world, open-minded person, who would not say that this doesn't hang together. So this is one way of doing it. But then how do we do it getting deeper? How do we do Jnana Yoga by going deeper? Well, that's where Tantra comes in, where Tantra is exploring the very inner architecture of your mind. And that's where the various chakras come in, and how do we do these sadhanas, and who are they, where are these the divinities mirrored within us. You know, you have three granthis. You have the Brahma Granthi in the Mooladhara chakra. Here in the sternum, you have the Vishnu Granthi. And here between the eyebrows, you have the Rudra Granthi. So you have three worlds within each individual. And if you learn how to explore it through proper mentorship by a guru, because this path of exploration is the path of the warrior, one can say. You are as a warrior within yourself. So you need guidance, because if you have weapons, you can also hurt yourself. If you don't know how to wield a sword and you are wielding it dangerously, you could cut off your own limbs, right? So you do need guidance by somebody, training, ethical preparation, as in the Yoga Sutras, you know, yamas and the niyamas, absolute commitment to truth, absolute compassion for everybody. Because if every human being and all living beings have the same Atman, have the same Shiva within them, then there is no difference between any of us, right? You and I are the same fundamentally in our essence. And therefore, it's also the path of love. If all of us are the same, we can love each other. Let me tell you again, it all hangs together. It has within it the capacity also to guide the world through this huge crisis of technology and of who we are, which is going to be the biggest thing across the world. There will be struggle at the personal level and between different societies, as is happening, for example, in Ukraine. The West wants the resources of Russia. They also want Russia, you know, the Western corporations ultimately want to control the West, control the lands in Russia or in other places. And since India is expected to become the world's largest economy in the next 25, 30 years, it's already the third largest based on a purchasing power parity basis, PPP basis. It's going to overtake, it's China, US, and India right now. And it's expected to overtake US in the next 12 years. And after that, in another 12 years, overtake China as well. So there will also be greater attacks on India. There will be greater attacks on Hinduism itself as a tradition, as is happening right now. All these attacks on, well, Hinduism is caste, which is not a word in any Sanskritic Indian language. There's no word for caste. There's only jati and there's varna. Jati is your lineage through your family, which is of course a truth. Everybody has a certain jati in certain community that you belong to. But varna is within each individual the capacity to connect to these four different aspects, because within each human being is the same Purush. All human beings, no matter what jati they come from, are the same Purush. They are all Shiva. So each one of them have the capacity for service, for organization, for defense of truth, and for exploration, right? And you know, when people come to me, they say, "Hey, I want to study with you." I tell them the first thing that you have to do is to be humble and to serve, to learn service, seva also in intellectual sphere. You know, the moment a person gets ahankar, hey, I'm very smart, they stop. They can never go beyond that level. So this is the most extraordinary thing. And I think if we get it in with this clarity, which I hope I've been able to describe, in my essay on Hinduism for the Perplexed, and the longer essay, a brief primer on Hinduism. I'm sure you will agree with me. And of course, you're free to criticize it and challenge it and to counter it, because knowledge is all a conversation, and it's all a satsang conversation. A true conversation is satsang, and it's in satsang that the goddess speaks through the different participants, and then people say things which they didn't even know they knew, and beautiful knowledge emerges out of it. So I think Sangam is doing that. Congratulations to you. We should do more of this satsang, because there is this reawakening that is taking place, not awakening. Awakening is wokeism, which is sad stuff that's going on right now. We want awakening, true awakening, where we awaken to this commonality which binds all human beings, and not all human beings, all manifested reality. Because you cannot have a system as in the West, where on the one hand, you're talking of that every human being should have the same life story, history, etc., which is what wokeism says, that everybody should have the same results, irrespective of whether they want to work or not, or want to are motivated to do that or not. But at the same time, you have this horrific system of these animal factories, where these animals are treated so inhumanely. These plants where these animals are injected these steroids so that they don't fall sick. They're fattened unnaturally, and then they are slaughtered on these machines. These male chicks, they are killed, they're ground. If they are male, they have machines which tell them which are females, which are males. The females are let through, and then they'll be made to grow up. But the males, within a day, are ground together and made into feed for the chicks to eat. This is inhumane. You can't do that. You have to treat animals also with kindness and compassion. The West is not doing it. There's all this stuff cannot but be the cause of grief at a colossal level. And maybe that's what's happening right now. This whole chain of karma, if you will, cannot be done away with. If you do bad, if you're not being kind all around, then the world, the cosmos will not be kind to you. Now, I must also say, people have been asking me, a lot of interviewers from Pakistan and from India and elsewhere from the West, in different, television and YouTube interviews. They say, hey, why is it that Indians, people who follow Sanatana Dharma, are so successful all over the world? Why is it that a Hindu has become the Prime Minister of England? Or look at America, all the greatest corporations are headed by Indians, right? What is this? Are they helping each other? No, nobody helps anybody. Every individual is alone. But I think what Sanatana Dharma, what Hinduism teaches every human being, if you are a part of it, that first of all, we in each puja, we say, Vishwa ka kalyan ho. Let the whole world peace for everybody. Let every person blossom. It's that universalist message. Which is, I think, characteristic, and all I know some of the most successful people, some of them are Indians, of course, and when I talk to them, you find that universal spirit in them. What they want to do is to be good for everybody, not for any specific ethnic group, but every individual, no matter from what community and origin. And I think that is the very heart of Hinduism, which we must celebrate, and so that others can see it for what it is.
Dr. Kak, you also spoke about clearing up some prevalent misconceptions about Hinduism. I would like you to touch upon one or two of them.
Well, the biggest one, of course, is jati, that Hinduism is jati. And right now, there's a lot of stuff by Westerners who are inimical And these are various groups. I will not name them. And some of them are, of course, racist. They are very envy. There's racism, envy. Hey, why are Hindus the most successful ethnic community in America, which is, of course, the richest land there is, are the Hindus, even more than the Jews right now. Hindus are the most successful. So there is a lot of envy. In fact, there is this national commentator on TV just yesterday or the day before. She said that why is Nikki Haley running for president? She should, even though she's a person who was born in the US, she should go back to the land where cows are worshipped. This is, these are these slurs which are slung, although, they all roll off the back, the back of the Hansa, the swan. If you view wisdom as that swan, which is separate but still in water, because all water rolls off the back of the swan. That's what Hinduism is. All these slurs roll off the back. Hinduism is not about cows. It's not about urine drinking, cow piss drinking. That's the slur thrown by all these terrorists, because in their own circles, they keep on repeating it. This is what Hinduism is. They keep on saying things which makes them feel good. It's like what happened in Rome in the first few centuries when Christianity was fighting Roman religion. Amongst Christian circles, the word was going about that the pagans eat babies, so they are evil people. So that's why the enemies of Hinduism, which are really maybe only driven by envy, enemies by envy, they're saying that, well, Hinduism is about cow piss drinking. Well, this is too bizarre. It's nothing to do with that. We worship all animals. When we said worship all animals, treat all animals with respect. I can tell you about my own family. As a child, as I was growing up in Srinagar, Kashmir, and we were not, like middle-class people, not prosperous. At that time, India was very, very poor. But the first thing my mother would do, the very first thing, after she had cooked the rice and whatever else, she would take a substantial portion of it from the pot in which it had been cooked and put it on top of the wall for the birds and then for the street dogs. A substantial portion. So it's this devotion to ecology, to all life forms, that be compassionate. That is what cow worship, the so-called cow worship, means. Be compassionate to all animals, right? Now, which is not to say that universal vegetarianism. That's of course, a lot of Hindus are vegetarians, but Hindus are also, they understand the universe as it is. In the universe, there is, animals also eat animals. A big fish must eat the smaller fish, otherwise the big fish will die in the ocean, right? So if you live in Kashmir, for example, where there were no vegetables to be had in winter because it was extremely cold, so people also ate meat. So all the Kashmiris were non-vegetarians, or the soldiers or the warriors ate meat. Rama and Lakshman also did hunting when they were in the forest, right? So there's no radical vegetarianism, but what Hinduism says is vegetarianism is a preferable thing. If you can be vegetarian, your lifestyle, that's a preferable thing. But if you want to be a non-vegetarian, that's perfectly fine. Worship all, be compassionate to all life forms. That's what so-called cow worship means. Now, so this is one slur that is thrown at Hinduism. The other big slur, because they have nothing else, is jati, is caste. But as I already mentioned, there's no cognate for the word caste in any Indian language. The word caste is from casta, Portuguese, related to classes. And because the European society was very class conscious, so they projected this on India. Now, in India, you had very different ethnic groups or communities living sort of independently who had their own system. They had their own priests and so on. And there were certain jatis where they had their own priests, their own. But then when the English did their census, I think it was the famous 1901 census or so, they asked the various jatis, what's your varna? They said, we don't have any varna. We are this jati. They said, no, your varna is this and this. So they put different communities into different varna categories, into different caste categories. And then they even said, well, certain such jatis are criminal jatis. They will not be given jobs in the army, for example. Or these are martial jatis, martial castes. So they created this system, and the English anthropologists were aware of it. In fact, there's a very famous quote, which I have mentioned in one of my essays, where this and chief of the Anthropological Survey of India says that, look, we deride and criticize the caste system, but we created it. By we, meaning the English created it. So now, of course, there were certain communities which were in the bottom of the totem pole, right? You have social hierarchies are a natural thing. Look at America, there are social hierarchies in every society. And especially in India, after the depredations of the English, after the English destroyed Indian society, after the famines that were created by their policies led to the death of maybe 80 to 100 million people, there were certain communities which are so poor. And when people become poor, then it's a question of survival of the fittest. Then there was also this oppression which enhanced, right? So there was let's be honest, and there was so-called oppression across jatis. And as a Sanatan Dharmi, I can say that we are totally against it. Every human being has exactly the same rights. Every human being has, in my view, not every Hindu scholar agrees with it, but in my view, as someone who has studied the text, who's also written in anthropological journals, including Mankind Quarterly in 1993, I wrote an essay called Understanding Caste in India, where I argue that the only correct way of looking at it is that every human being has all the four varnas in them. Now, of course, there are certain social tasks where one of these varna as a capacity is focused. For example, if you're a soldier, you must fight. At that time, you're not supposed to argue what is the nature of reality. It's a question of life and death. So that is a certain attitude which is emphasized. So you have to be Kshatriya at that time, primarily. Although you could be a philosopher who looks at how wars take place. At that time, you're using a different aspect of yourself. But to come back, these twin attacks on cow worshipping, Hinduism, I've already answered that, and the caste thing, not a part of Hinduism. All people are the same Purusha. You look at it either in Sankhya, or certainly the Bhagavad Gita says that it's through guna and karmas, right? So, and those gunas and karmas potentially within each individual has the capacity to embrace whatever gunas they want. So any individual can obtain whatever gunas they want to embrace, to be a part of. And guna karma vibhag is how you can look at this. Then you do various things. If you want to be a soldier, then you join the army, right? But to come back, all human beings are equal. And even animals can be attached to this larger ecological view of reality, where we and the rest of ecological system, the rest of the creatures form a family, and we should treat not just other human beings with compassion and love, we must also treat other animals with compassion and love. This is the very heart, and I think this truly addresses whatever critique there is against Hinduism. But as I also said, the rest of the world, forget what people, crazy academics say in their offices, because they have to write these papers, the rest of the world, the broad world, is embracing this view. Hinduism in lived life is yoga. Hinduism is yoga. And people across all corners of the world are embracing yoga as the way to live their life by. So in that sense, Hinduism formally maybe only 18% of the world population, if you look at how you count people, but in reality, it might already be 50 or 60%. And it's not that we are counting, it's the universal way. Hinduism is the way of the world, the way of wisdom. So it's the universal way of wisdom. This is not ethnic pride. This is not being parochial and saying that, hey, this is good because I'm from India. Well, it's like saying science. Everybody should embrace science. Everybody should embrace Sanatana Dharma because it's consistent both with science. Deeper science does accept the independent category of consciousness. In one line, if you ask me in one line, which we already went over in the beginning, in one line, what is Hinduism? Hinduism is there is the physical reality and then there is consciousness. There is Atma, and they are complementary aspects of the universe.
I already have a question here. Please elaborate on the concept of dharma. How does it apply to the young corporate employees and startups or entrepreneurs? How can they benefit from the dharma or the Gita? And there is another part to this question also. How does Swadharma factor in the corporate setup?
Dharayati iti dharma. This is what the Mahabharata says. Dharma is truth related to all this wisdom. But now when we live in the world with other people, how do we hold on to ethical and moral principles while relating to the inevitable conflict, because different people have different aspirations and there can be contests about it, as occurred in the Mahabharata story, right, or in Ramayana. So there will be conflict, and there would be evil. Evil is also a reality. And what is evil? People who are ignorant about the true meaning of what reality is. If they think they are only bodies, they must dominate, right? Or who are, there's another interesting gloss on all of this, which is children of Diti and Aditi. Children of Diti are those, Diti and Aditi were sisters. Diti means finite. Children of Diti are those people who believe they are nothing but their bodies. And they are called Datyas. Children of Diti are Datyas. And Aditi means infinite. And infinite here is a pointing to consciousness, to Chaitana, to Shiva within us, right? Maheshwara within us, which is infinite because it transcends space and time. So there will be conflict between Adityas and the Datyas, between those who worship the Vedas or the Devas and those who worship raw power, which is the Datyas. And that will always happen. So how to live one's life truthfully, to be able to do this contest, because that will happen, is what dharma is all about. And now there are lessons that one can draw. And the reason why Mahabharata and Ramayana are these eternal stories, which are still so powerful when you have these kathavachaks who tell these stories, which we already know. For example, the Kevat episode that my wife was talking to me the other day, she heard somebody tell this, and they are so moving. Why are they moving? Because these touch upon things which are very fundamental to our being, related to both acquisition and renunciation. There are two aspects. Acquisition, what the Vedas tell you is that you must acquire, because the various purusharthas, right? But the last one is sannyasa, where you give things up. So renunciation is a wonderful aspect of life as well. Now, Western traditions don't have any place for renunciation. It's only about acquisition. Capitalism is only about acquisition. And that's why it has reached the point, tragic point in my view. You look at Western cities, you look at LA, I was there just last year, 70,000 people homeless living on the streets. Or you go to the Bay Area, 100,000 people. Why are people living? They're eating out of trash cans and so on. Why? And drugged up, with the syringes and so on. Because this other aspect of reality, of renunciation, there's another way of looking at it, that there are two great teachers. Shiva as auspicious. Shiva means auspiciousness, right? But the other aspect of Shiva is as Kala, Mahakala, right? Mahakaleshwar, for example. Or if you didn't want to talk about it in the context of Shiva, you have the great Kathopanishad. I can tell you, when I was a child, when I first read the Kathopanishad, it was electrifying. Here is this boy, Nachiketa, who tells his father, because his father is doing something wrong, he says, who would you give me to? And the father says, I give you to Yama, meaning death. And he seeks out death. And then death teaches him, because Yama is the greatest teacher. The greatest way to find that path of dharma within yourself is to live every day as if it were the last day, the path of the warrior. The path of dharma is the path of the warrior. If you follow the path of the warrior, what is the path of the warrior? You go to the battlefield. Life is the Kurukshetra, right? You go to the battlefield, you could die any day. So you must fight and do battle with the greatest passion and energy. That is the path of dharma, right? And you can take specifically, as far as the details are concerned, you have to look at the context. One cannot address the context here, but I do know that there are professors. And some of the greatest professors in the US are incidentally of Indian origin, because I've seen these lists of the greatest business professors. The journal Business Week used to have them. I don't subscribe to Business Week anymore, but many years ago when I used to subscribe to it, there used to be, hey, this Indian name, this Indian name. And some of these guys, because American university system is a kind of a free system. When you are teaching graduate courses, you can propose any graduate course to your head of the department and to the dean, and they say, yeah, this hangs together. Open society. And people in America teach courses such as, in business schools, such as, business strategy based on the Bhagavad Gita, or business strategy based on the Mahabharata, and so on. And that's beautiful, or the Ramayana, and so on. And there are great lessons there.
So many of the times I have heard you, sir, saying like, modern science are being saturated. So the next phase of development will come from the Vedic sciences. So what is the word cutting edge development? So we have known many of the frameworks from you only, okay, like Yat Pinde Tat Brahmande, the miniature universe concept. So now what is the cutting edge word here? Means is it some kind of advanced thing? Yeah.
Okay, I can tell you this. See, both from the perspective of physics, neuroscience, and computer science, the cutting edge, the frontier is what is consciousness, right? Because in computer science, you want to create machines which are conscious. That's why people are looking at consciousness. And I can tell you personally, I've been a part of discussions at the highest level in the West, where DARPA brought together the leading scientists to look at the question of whether machines of the future will be conscious. Okay, so I've been a part of these discussions. And because if machines become conscious, if computers become conscious, then they will, first of all, kill off all the humans, right? The humans are so, create problems all the time. They never know what they want. These computers will do. But we concluded, discussing at the highest level, that computers truly will not be conscious for reasons from quantum mechanics, from Brahma Sutras. All Brahma Sutras are about why from Sharir, Atma cannot arise, right? So that's why Atma is separate. That's what Vedanta is all about, that Atma complements physical body. Atma is separate, it transcends, it's para. That's what the heart of Ved का रहस्य क्या है? जो रहस्य ये है कि आत्मा शरीर से परे है, वो para है. Sharir is apara, Atma is para, right? Now, so this is one effort that's going on. And what is Ved? What is Veda? Veda is the science of consciousness, science of Atma. It's para vidya is what Ved is. The other vidyas can be created, and we should do those also, right? In fact, there is a beautiful conversation, samvad hai Bhagavad Puran mein between Narad and Yudhishthir. What should a person do? You should do shiksha. Shiksha means learning whatever is there, you know, all the sciences which are apara sciences. But after you have done shikshas, you will reach a point of paroksha where there will be paradox. And then you are ready for vidya, real vidya, para vidya. From apara vidya to go to para vidya. That is the path that everybody should do. And that is the path that all of the world is ready for now, because modern sciences are all apara vidya. And why do you need paravidya? First of all, to understand consciousness, because consciousness itself is paravidya. The second is that modern science can explain only 0.5% of the cosmos. And I can tell you personally, over the last 3 years, I've been fortunate that having studied Vaisheshik Sutras, which I translated 7 years ago in a book called Matter and Mind, which is freely available on Amazon.India as well and elsewhere, where I discovered that Kanada, the Rishi Kanad, says that, look, first of all, as far as outer world is concerned, it's all a interplay of dravya, guna, and karma, which means properties and motions, which is exactly consistent with modern physics. Properties and motions. But as far as our own understanding is concerned, the conceptions that are created in our minds, so including those of Dik and Kal, of space and time, are a creation of the mind. With this as the beginning, I've been able to create a new theory, which has been published in a variety of journals, including Nature, Scientific Reports, etc., where I argue, based on a mathematical theorem, that space is not three-dimensional. In our mind, it is three-dimensional, and that's the way it should be, because that's how the mind works. But in reality, it's only E-dimensional, E meaning 2.718. And if it's E-dimensional, then we can understand gravitation. We can also understand dark matter, dark energy. All these paradoxes go away. And not only that, we even published a paper last year, which shows why there will be 25 tattvas. You know, we've said there are 25 tattvas of physical reality that we have in Sankhya. They also emerge. I was not looking for these numbers. All of these things emerge. So this could, hopefully, we don't know, all science is a conversation. This could be the next big thing.
So there is a question that for somebody who is just getting to know Hinduism, what is the basic reading that you would recommend to make Upanishads and Gita more accessible and debunk misconceptions?
Huge misconceptions. All the books, academic books that you read, as I said, are wrong. Read the Upanishads. They're great, inspirational. But maybe I could do a plug for my own books. You know, they are available. For example, you can read the books, The Nature of Physical Reality, or The Architecture of Knowledge, Matter and Mind, or Mind and Self. And they are they're very easily accessible. In fact, I asked my publisher, what is the lowest you can keep a Kindle edition at? He says, we are permitted to keep the lowest price of 99 rupees. So they're only 99 rupees. If you wanted to buy them, but buy Ananda Kumaraswamy's books, and they're freely available on the internet. You can download books such as the beautiful book, Hinduism and Buddhism by Ananda Kumaraswamy, or The Dance of Shiva by Ananda Kumaraswamy. Beautiful books. Read books by Aurobindo. Read a lot of the stuff that comes from Gita Press Gorakhpur. Read books by Gopinath Kaviraj, or read the Bhagavad Gita, go back to it, chant it, and think about it, and go to the Upanishads. There is nothing in the world, and I'm only echoing what Schopenhauer, the great German philosopher, said. He says, you know, when you're in the deepest depression, there's nothing as uplifting in this world as the Upanishads. Nothing as uplifting. Read the Upanishads. Go back to the source. Read the Upanishads. Read the Bhagavad Gita. Get connected to 4 or 5 of the suktas of the Rig Veda. Do some chanting. Do some Sanskrit. I wrote an essay on this called The Case for Sanskrit on Medium. Sanskrit is a great, it's like a blessing. It's like a blessing. The grace comes through it. Why does it come through it? Why not through any other language? Well, all languages are equal. I'm not saying that Sanskrit is necessarily superior, but through the discipline that is required to do Sanskrit. Because as I said, grace comes out of tapas, of suffering. Tapas is also suffering. If you suffer, if you really feel something, if you have that Ichha Shakti, if you are ready to suffer, then the goddess through Anugraha gives that grace. So Sanskrit is that process of grace, because you also have to do some suffering to learn Sanskrit. And it opens up this main text that there are. If you can do the Gita in Sanskrit, and it's not difficult to chant it. And the more you chant it, you'll be able to do the Sandhi Vichhed by yourself. All the Indian languages are really so connected to Sanskrit. The more you chant it, you'll see that you actually know it already. This is something amazing occurs. The more you chant it, one day you realize, well, I actually am able to understand it. I have not done Sanskrit formally at all. You tell yourself, without doing Sanskrit formally, I know it. It's just like mother language. Kids, when they're taught, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, they understand the language. They're not taught the grammar. Just by learning, speaking to their mother and to each other, they learn one day, or it's a gradual process, they know the language. Likewise with Sanskrit, I think the time has come for all of us. Anybody who seeks knowledge, true knowledge, must also resolve. There is a dakshana that needs to be paid. This is the dakshana. Make a resolution that you will also be connected to Sanskrit. And then Saraswati, through Anugraha, will give you the grace. Through that grace, will give you the deeper meaning.
Sir, this is not only true of Sanskrit, but also of Awadhi. I read the Ramcharitmanas. And the more you sing it, the more you chant it, the more it just illuminates itself.
It becomes transparent. Then you realize that you actually do know Awadhi as well. Yes. Absolutely. Beautiful. Yes, yes.
About your books, you said they are very easily available. The book, The God Within, is not available in India. How do we get it? You'll have to come personally to Delhi and give us a lecture here.
The Gods Within is freely available on the internet. Cost 0 rupees. You go to academia.edu, my page, and there are books. That whole manuscript is there for free. You can just download it. It's free, zero cost. So, including the book Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda. It's also on academia.edu. There are 2 buttons. One is papers, the other is books. You click on books, it's in that list. Another book that there you'll find, which I'm really very deeply fond of, it's called the Pragya Sutras. And these are 18 sutras. I think it was 2002. I was flying from Washington, D.C. to Houston, and what happened was the stewardess came to me with a cup of tea, and something flashed in my mind. And I got these 18 sutras, which I scribbled on the aircraft magazine, the airplane magazine. Then finally I wrote them down and wrote a little book around them. And I think they go to the very heart of what the Vedas are. There are 18 sutras. And so please go to academia.edu. They're also published by DK Publishers. But if you go to academia.edu, go to my books button, and so you'll see that. Prajna, Pragya Sutras.
So this is a coincidence or grace or something that just this morning I opened this book called Mother's Agenda to a random page. And for the first time, I come across something called the Mother's Sutras. She's given 6 sutras. And now you just mentioned how the sutras...
I did not know the 6 sutras by their mother. So I will look them up. And but these are
Agent,
18 sutras, and these they you know, the very heart of our problem in this world is, first of all, the very three things are: what is paroksha, what is bandhu, and what is yagya. You know, what is yagya? Paroksha is paradox. You know, we see paradox all around us. Even love, you know, do we love or do we not love? You know, what is love? You can't possess, but still we want to possess. That's a paradox. Yeah, let me just complete. The other is bandhu. How are we even able to make sense of this world? We are a dust, a particle of dust on this particle of dust, which is Earth, in this infinite cosmos. Because of this bandhu, the pinda and the brahmanda bandhu. And what is yagya? Yagya is normally translated into sacrifice. Yagya is that rebirth. And yagya is something, this moksha that takes place, it doesn't take place upon death. Moksha takes place now, in this life. And this moksha takes place when we get free of the karmic chain. Karma is all about reactions. When the animals also react continuously, right? In fact, there is a Rig Vedic passage which says there are two kinds of pashu, dvipadas and chatushpadas, bipeds and quadrupeds. So humans are also pashu. We become free only when we cut off these pashas, these bindings to our instincts. And it's only at that moment we are free. And that freedom, you can do it through karma, through action, through sadhana, through arts, through whatever your method is. That moment is sacrifice. When you sacrifice who you were before and become a new self. And that is what rebirth is. That is what Punarjanman is. So for this, please go to my book, the Pragya Sutras, free for all of you.
I have two questions. See, when we talk about Upanishads and Vedas, are these topics to be understood when we make our own mind so subtle that we are able to go beyond thoughts, and then we are able to understand the true relevance and meaning of Upanishads and Vedas, which is beyond anyways the logical mind? Number one. The other question was, Subhashji, you were right. Western science is a reductionist science. So they reduce everything to the single digit, whereas our Vedas and Puranas are of a different level. So how is it an engineer like me who's really interested in, quantum physics, but more interested in Upanishads and Vedas, able to use it to create some, device or something? Where can that information be available?
Well, the Vedas are not just about the inner, about the sukshma, but they're also about the sthula. You also have the shastras that are about the sthula. So they have both. So we should embrace all.
Okay.
Now, your first question was Upanishads. Don't we have to have that subtlety before we can understand it? Two answers to that. First of all, you can't understand anything unless you have done preparation. You can't teach quantum mechanics to a fifth grader, right? So you have to go through various steps. Now, so preparation is necessary. So shiksha is necessary before we can be ready for Paravidya. But fortunately, every human being has awareness, and every human being has experienced transcendence in some way or the other, through poetry perhaps, through watching a sunrise or a sunset, through feeling good through love perhaps, when two lovers look into each other's eyes, that could be a moment of transcendence also, right? Through different ways. So people are in some way naturally ready, if only they were to reorient themselves. In Kashmir Shaivism, there is a philosophy called Prati Abhigya, of recognition. Ultimately, Upanishads or the Vedas or the Gita are a way of recognizing the Atma in oneself, which you already are. The problem is कि हम उससे विमुख हो गए हैं. यदि हम अपना जो चेहरा है change करें, अपना रुख change करें, then you'll see all that beauty within yourself, and you would be aware of that in an amazing way for the first time. So in other words, it's all possible. The most important thing is Ichha Shakti. You have to take that resolve. I want to really know. If you really want to do it, you know, as they say, यदि एक शिष्य गुरु चाहता है, तो गुरु तब वहां पे प्रकट होगा. You know, if you really want to learn this wisdom, the guru will appear by itself.
You were right. You were right. Of course, I'm talking with a lot of preparation behind it. I understand what you're saying. But you said the Paravidya, the Aparavidya, right? Sorry.
जो आपका दूसरा क्वेश्चन है, okay, how does one make use of it in one's technology? Good,
yeah,
very good
yeah.
question. Yeah, I had forgotten that. You know, my own research in the last 2-3 years, which was triggered by, as I mentioned, Kanada's argument that, look, the ideas of space-time are conventions. In Western science also, there are conventions which go back to Descartes, you know,
yes.
orthogonal directions. And they were not challenged either in the Newtonian framework or in the Einsteinian framework. But what I did, I said, well, look, if space is not three-dimensional, if it's e-dimensional, then that suddenly opens up the doorway, because if you're doing nanomechanics, right, if you're doing materials, metamaterials, because in metamaterials also you have systems which go through different dimensionality. You know, one aspect of non-integer dimensionality is fractal behavior. And fractals can appear in metamaterials. Perhaps they are important in devices as well. And I've written several papers in the last 2 years on fractals as well. So now you might ask me, where is this all? I can tell you, you know, between you guys and me, these things come sort of nowhere, rushing out.
No, so true.
Every human being has that capacity. And that's how creativity occurs. If you learn how to open up that antahakaran, the inner instrument, to the infinite reservoir which exists within each individual.
Yeah, true.
Each individual is Shiva. If you only accept it, and it's not sectarian, no matter what one's background, no matter what one's own astha, what's one belief system, if you only believe that this infinite potential resides within you, all doorways, the inner dwars, jo hain, wo khul jayenge. And you'll be able to do it in whatever technology you do, whatever your domain of action, whatever your karma kshetra is, whether you're a businessman, whether you're a technologist, whether you're an artist, you're a painter, whatever else, or a human being, just a human being. The greatest happiness that one can also get is through service, through seva. That itself becomes a whole world of such, that devotion itself can give you such pleasure and happiness that it can be life transforming.
One last question, sir. You were talking about Daityas, and you said those who believe in the raw power. You know. So what would you say about the people who believe in power through numbers? Like the more the tribe, the more my population, the more strong I am.
Oh, absolutely. You know, what happens is, I wrote a little essay on it, which I again recommend to you. It's called The Power of the Story. And I started off by saying how this Rig Vedic line says that we are Pashu, and we are indeed Pashu. Every human being is born a Pashu. Now, if you go to a store in the West, you have these stores where abandoned dogs can be adopted by people. So these dogs are in little cages. And as you pass by the cages, the dogs make eye contact with you and look beseechingly into your eyes and say, please adopt me, right? Human beings are like this. And stories that are taught to them in culture, or a microculture, are like the people that they want to connect to. So as young people, we want to get connected to stories. And some of these stories are bad stories. They say, okay, you are big and strong. When you grow up, kidnap these girls, abduct these girls, or have them, and you do this. And that's how evil is born. And so evil is a part of this world because you need to do uncovering of truth, unavaran. Truth is covered. There's light within you, within each one of us is covered to a certain extent. If you can uncover it, that's when you discover that the other is the same as you. Then you won't think about domination. Then you would think of love. So rather than hate, rather than nafrat, the path would be the path of prem, right? So there are societies which are driven by nafrat, by hate, right? But I say, okay, let it be. Let's only spread the path of love, and maybe you'll be able to appeal to this love, which is probably present in some corner in even every oppressor's heart. If you are able to appeal to it, maybe they will be able to also get connected to this big stream, the big river of love. So I will not say any more.
This is just so beautiful, the power of a story, because I always wondered that instead of picking up my, what now I see that whatever stories you consume at an impressionable age, you imbibe. And in my case, it has been characters of stories. Gone with the Wind, she keeps saying, I'll think about it tomorrow. I picked up that so automatically at the age of 10 or 11 or whenever I read it. And then the book, some books have really a deep influence on you. Some movies or dramas that you have seen, the characters.
Absolutely. In
and
fact,
why have I picked up only the negative or the weaker aspects of these characters, not the stronger ones?
Okay, two answers. First of all, that's why one needs inspiration, prerna, right? So that's why education, sanskars are very important. The sanskars are pathways in your mind, so to speak. So if you get the right sanskars, then it becomes easier to connect to the beautiful and the inspirational and the all-encompassing and all-embracing, right? Now, I also wanted to add that neuroscience has shown that what you do and what you think actually changes the very structure of your brain. For example, what they had this scientific experiment on this monkey, where the monkey was made to turn a wheel by one of his fingers all the time. And then they opened up his brain very cruelly. Neuroscientists also do some brain cruel stuff. They ultimately cut off their brain. They discovered that the motor cortex corresponding to the finger, because the fingers, the whole body is mirrored in the motor cortex, had enlarged in relation to the other fingers. So the very structure and the organization of the brain changes based on what you do. That's why education is so important. That's why what the social media is now doing is become such a negative force, let's say in the West and maybe in India as well, because what the social media is doing, we have these 5 Mahabhutas and the 5 Tanmatras, Prithvi, Apas, Tejas, Vayu, and Akasha. Akasha is the medium of meaning, of deeper meaning. Now, social media is all about seeing things on the screen, which is Tejas. Tejas is form. So you're stuck. If you're stuck in Tejas, you are basically denying the deeper aspects of your being. Because ultimately, reality, everything has to be balanced, as in Ayurveda. You need harmony of the 3 doshas, right? So many of these things become unintelligible as to what's going on if you see it from this ecological perspective. And Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, provides us this capacity. And that's a great instrument that we have. And this great instrument we want to share with the rest of the world. That look, If we are successful, even though we came from such a difficult situation 40 or 50 years ago all over the world, you can be too. And not only will you be successful in your outer enterprises, but you'll also be happy, because it also leads you to Ananda, that you have that proper balance between Sat, in the outer reality, Chit in your memories, the inner cosmos, and you get that bliss, which is really the purpose of life.